hopefully, with any luck.
Yep, it says it's streaming live on Facebook.
Well, there we go. Our meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. How's that for technology?
Pretty
Future.
incredible.
All right, so welcome to Up Close. I'm Randy Dixon, Artistic Director of Unexpected Productions. And with me this week are Lou and Shimon. And we're going to be talking about virtual reality and improvisation this week. And I'll get more to the intro in a second in terms of why we're having this discussion. But again, every week we talk for about an hour with somebody with some improvisational connection. And so this week it's Lou and Shimon. And if you have questions or comments, I'm going to be trying to monitor this Facebook feed. So hopefully you can ask them there. And if you want to find out about classes and shows, we have a show tonight, Fact or Fiction Storytelling Show. That's at 7 o'clock Pacific time. So come and check that out. If you haven't yet, we also are doing our Wednesday duo show, and that's actually happening with a few live audience members at the Market Theater in the Pike Place Market. So come and check that out. You want to find out more about classes, you want to find out more about what we're doing online and elsewhere, check out unexpectedproductions.org. You can also make a donation then if you feel so moved. Okay. And I'll give a brief intro here to what we're going to be talking about, and I'll let Shimon and Lou kind of introduce themselves and their histories. So we were all fortunate to be part of a big project of Lou's creation or inspiration, I guess. I don't know. There were a lot of people behind it, but of a show called Tinker, which was a virtual reality improv show that had its world preview at the Sundance Film Festival last week. So it was great to be able to go there and perform. Although we didn't get to go there, but we went there online, and it was a lot of fun performing for a bunch of people. And we'll talk about that because I know, Lou, that was a particular dream of yours for many years to get to Sundance. So we'll talk about that. But what the project was, and in brief, was a user got to play a grandchild interacting with their grandfather, who over the course of several years has Alzheimer's disease, and the results of that. So I was lucky enough to get to play the grandfather and to be able to interact with all these users one-on-one. There were some observers who were watching, but the interaction improvisationally was just literally one-on-one with me interacting with another person. And we'll get into the roles that everybody played because mine was just being the improviser. These are the guys who were sort of behind a lot of the stuff that happened. So, so Lou, let's start with you. You want to talk a little bit about your history and how you got into this and whatnot, and then Shimon?
Yeah, I just want to say we were thankful that we got you. I just want to be very clear about that. It wouldn't be world class without you. But my name is Lou Ward. I'm the director of Tinker. We're an indie studio where we're making positive cause nonprofit projects for neurodegenerative health and other things of that nature. I basically studied 2D animation, and this is actually an evolution of that film that I did my senior year at school. I helped found the Seattle VR AR meetup about 5 or 6 years ago, and been iterating with Randy and Shimon over the last several years on this piece. And it was inspired by my own sort of family history with Alzheimer's, and inspired by my grandfather's battle with the disease, and also my mother who has ALS, really about sort of showcasing how people can build relationships in a world where we feel disconnected. And and it's a large team, and it wouldn't be here without them. And so I just want to thank everyone that's been part of this journey, part of the Seattle community, and also just generally Shimon, Randy as well. So yeah.
Cool. And Shimon?
Oh yeah, my name's Shimon. From Bermuda, group of islands in the Atlantic, but living on the mainland in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. Dual citizen, so it makes it a little easier. Art and design were kind of always of interest of mine growing up. I discovered really theater in college, and so studied theater in college and right after in grad school, theater, improvisational theater, applied improv. And kind of those really resonated with me, and later kind of just found other ways in other contexts to use those things, including starting to explore over time my background in play, game, story, and systems for game design and development. Although I always had an interest, I'd say, around social impact and social change projects. And so it was a lot of applied work, including a piece like this. And certainly, maybe at some point we'll get to share the story, but I certainly, it resonated from the beginning with me for several reasons, one of which because my grandmother had Alzheimer's. So I kind of had a personal connection to that kind of experience and what we were working on from the beginning from that.
Right. Cool. And yeah, and again, more background, which Lou mentioned, I mean, the three of us have been involved in this project for 5 years, which is wild. And to then be able to do it at Sundance, which was sort of one of the signposts, was pretty amazing. And to also feel like, well, now it's beginning. It's not even like the end. Oh, we made it at Sundance. It's over. It's, it's more like, okay, that was the first signpost after all these years of working on it. And Lou, I'm curious, in terms of the virtual reality versus the, say, 2D animation film you were thinking about making, what happened there in that process? Like, what inspired you and said, no, I want to do it this way versus I'm gonna do it as a movie, rather than an experience.
Yeah. Is my microphone working? Okay. Yeah. So basically what happened was my senior year, I was able to sort of do an animatic or like a first run of that. And I had the director of Sandlot do the voiceover, which was really cool. And I was sort of processing my emotions with my grandfather. I ended up sort of starting at Microsoft and trying a DK2 headset. And then I thought this might be the future of storytelling. Well, I did think it was going to be future storytelling. And then what I really wanted to do is I thought this subject matter specifically was really attuned to sort of VR because you could possibly showcase memory and sort of attachment to objects in a virtual environment. I think the thing that I really wanted to do is instead of creating a pre-baked experience, creating sort of a collaborative moment between you and another character. And so, I think that having an improviser like yourself is super talented really carried the piece because what we're trying to do is have people bond over certain moments in their life and also connected to sort of the guardrails that we had. And so that's sort of the antithesis of the story. And then I started working on this by myself as like a location-based experience, but last year we switched it to being an online experience before COVID. And so now we can give demos to anyone, anytime. And so that's sort of something that I'm really passionate about. I'm super excited to see what we evolve this to. But yeah, this sort of generally.
Cool. And Shimon, how did you get involved with Tinker specifically?
Yeah, as I kind of mentioned, like just an interest in emerging technology. Seattle has, I feel like, a really robust scene for that. And we go to meetups, started to work on hackathon projects, small studio projects, and then sometimes I work with large companies. But I had kind of been online and just kind of seen Lou's profile. And really, hardware and software has been the focus of kind of the reemergence of I'll focus on VR specifically. And that makes sense. And it's really relevant. At the same time, I'm sitting there thinking, well, how do we create experiences? How do we make them interactive? How do we explore those experiences being, involving some narrative elements? And so Lou had kind of shouted out narrative. I can still remember on his LinkedIn profile, and I looked at his website, which was like 1 or 2 pages at that point. And so I bumped into him much later at a meetup where he had given us a talk, and we talked after. He said, well, we ought to get together. And it took months. We did some back and forth. He was busy. There was always some project at Microsoft. But we finally got together on Capitol Hill. It's a little neighborhood in Seattle. We met up for a meal. We were talking through it. And I mean, by the end, I was really enthusiastic and excited. Like, how often do you get really, like I said, I've got this kind of hybrid background of like, live improvisational theater in a virtual environment. Right. And it was really interesting to see both of those things come together. So that in and of itself was super interesting to me. And then this idea of like really creating this opportunity for two people to build a relationship, and like for that relationship to kind of fall away and be lost because of something like Alzheimer's. I like I said, I had that kind of personal connection through the Alzheimer's, the improv, and I can still at least distinctly remember. I think it was pretty clear that by the end it was like, great, so I'm working on this project, right? And yeah, Lou's like, you're working on the project by the end of the first meeting. So yeah.
Right. Cool. And to clarify, I mean, Shimon has gone through our UP classes and has done classes in improv before, and he was sort of my introduction to this process and to the project. And yeah, I mean, it's Shimon.
After you, no, continue. I just, before you kick it to Lou, I have a story related to how you ended up on the project. Right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's really relevant because it's improv focused. So I was also really impressed when talking about the piece and like, oh, well, we need someone, that Lou said, this is a really serious experience. I don't just want it to be for laughs. We need to find somebody who really is also open to kind of do something moving and dramatic. And I said, absolutely. Having studied at UP, I feel like it's short and long form, explores the whole human experience, smiling, laughing, and crying, and comedic and dramatic art forms when it comes to improv. And so I just wanted to shout that out because in this forum, it's like I really appreciated that Lou was thinking of it that way. And then I said, oh yeah, I have ideas. He's like, no. I was like, Lou, I have ideas. And then I said, okay, I know the first person we ought to ask, particularly given that requirement, and I think they'd be incredible for this. I don't know if they'll do it, but let's ask them. And that was you, Randy. Oh. Unfortunately, you said yes. So I think we were lucky. You said at the beginning, we're lucky to work on the piece, but we were lucky you said yes, given all the experience you have and what you can contribute.
That's a good version of the story, because in my head I was thinking Shimon thinks about like, who's the least funny person I know? Let's get him involved.
That's right. Well, I thought of all the times you brought me to tears when I trained with you, Randy. And
right. So let's launch into the deeper end of the pool a little bit and talk about narrative and actually the content. So the stuff that moves people, the stuff that touches people. I mean, clearly we're in the project touching upon several things that can be emotional connections that audience members have, whether it be Alzheimer's, but also just that relationship to a grandparent and being with a grandparent. And so, the thing that struck me actually from the very beginning and in working with it was this notion that the focus is on the narrative, even though there's all the technology that's involved. And there's a lot of it. But I always loved that everything came back to kind of the interaction and the story. And also trying to capture an aspect or a feeling around hopefully what Lou felt with his grandfather. And in doing that, then connecting to all these other narratives. I'm not super experienced, obviously, in VR stuff. I've done some other stuff. I've been to see some other stuff. But I clearly don't know the way around the block, so to speak. Is that the future of VR? Is it more driving towards narrative, or is it driving more towards the tech-based experience of like, wow, this is so cool, this is so real looking? Which way is it going? Or is it coming around to this, the story is driving, I guess?
I guess I'll go first. Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think a lot of people are focused on sort of hardware, just based upon sort of Apple's sort of starting to think about joining the arena of things in that sort of lane. But I also think that there's this huge effort to sort of personify humans, and also what does that mean for a digital game or even a VR game? I think that something that sort of the future storytelling is, and this is something that ILM sort of personified in a recent article, is like sort of embodying experiences and like making it about you, and also about like sort of collaboration. I won't deep dive into that, but I think that for like everything that I've worked on, so I'll just give a little tiny bit of history, is that we started sort of doing virtual production before virtual production was sort of named that, like 5 or 6 years ago, with like motion capture. I can even bring out a mocap helmet that we had Randy in. So there's a lot of like sort of momentum with that. And so virtual production, just to give context, is something like The Mandalorian, where they have like a background and then they have like character in the suit or something, and then they have like all this digital artifacts. But we're utilizing that to sort of showcase a unique narrative with sort of just a headset, right? And so I think something that was really unique about what we were doing, and still continuing to iterate on, is that it's basically a live theater piece, but also just a live experience. But people can walk around and see how Randy's articulating the grandfather's face and things of that innovative nature. I think that a lot of people, when they first try VR, it's more of a physics engine, and people are like, oh, I can grab this, I can throw this, and these sort of things, right? But then when you could actually talk to someone in a virtual environment, I think Randy had a couple of these experiences where like one person was like, oh, I didn't have any grandparents or growing up. And then this is like interesting to sort of personify that. But I'll leave it to Shimon to talk about what his sort of opinions are.
Okay. Well, I mean, I thought you thoughtfully responded. I think it's the maturation of any medium, like the hardware and software is getting figured out and like making it accessible and affordable. And so it's kind of natural. I think, inherently everything's an experience, and then almost always any medium looks at like narrative elements and narrative because it's so fundamental to being a person. Right. So we can have a lot of things in VR as it continues to develop that don't have quote unquote any narrative, that are just experiences. And that could be really relevant for people. Similarly, you could the VR is a social medium, an embodied experience, and get to interact with other people in VR, at a distance. But at some point, it's sort of like, oh, well, wait a minute. Like, what about experiences with narrative elements and feels like we had an experience that we could talk about as a story, that it just kind of makes sense. Think of any medium. So I think it's just going to continue to be part of what's the future of the medium, because that's just how people are. We kind of attracted to narratives.
Well, and the intersection there, and this is something that again, being an improviser, of course I'm going to be attracted to, is that live interaction with an audience member. Which, when I think about, you're playing a video game or you're doing something else, not necessarily a VR experience, but you always get that sense of like, oh, the game's programmed to react this way to me and blah, blah, blah. And the thing I found as the performer in Tinker, sort of picking from what Lou said, was it was different every time, because you're with this one person and they had grandparents, they didn't have grandparents, they were close, they were not close. There was, there are all these different elements that changed every single time we did it. And so it got me thinking in terms of like, well, maybe this is part of the equation for the future in terms of VR, is being able to be interactive. And I know during the course of this, definitely researched and you guys sent me stuff to other VR projects, incorporated actors and whatnot. But one of the things I saw, and one of the things that was written about Tinker at Sundance, was when they kept referring to like whether I couldn't tell if the actor was on script or not. And I was like, script? And how it would not have worked if we had a really tight word by word script, because then the user would get that sense of like, oh, they're not reacting to me, they're reacting to the words on a page. So that felt very freeing, and it led me to think like, oh, well, maybe this is a direction that VR can go into in terms of that one-on-one experience, but you're going to need that human touch in a way. You're going to need that human who can adjust and change accordingly.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Randy's available to work in the meeting. Who's done a world preview. I think something that I think about I think has come up before that's really relevant. And before, with your question, maybe I didn't get the live part, but yeah, no, it's pretty incredible to get interact live in a virtual reality with people. So I think that's one of the reasons social VR will proliferate, like I was mentioning before, just getting to interact at all. But Lou kind of talked about this with the piece, which I thought really made sense early on. It's like, well, we couldn't have an experience like this for people if we tried to program an AI to be the grandfather. So, I appreciate what you're sharing, Randy. You're saying, oh, well, it was different every time because of the participant. Similarly, right? Like it's different every time for the participant because you're there. And because you're a trained performer, you can do things that we couldn't code. I would say that no one could code currently. Given the experience you have, the ways you're able to moment react and respond, but also reincorporate and have the sense of bringing things back moment to moment over the arc of the piece. Like that's something that the AI can't do. It can't get all that variable from like the other participant as a co-performer and like bring that back in the way a live performer can. So I think when you're saying like the future being with people, that's because we still get something from that we can't get from an AI. If we're trying to interact, it's not as enriched, it's not as spontaneous and responsive.
Cool. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it was interesting to sort of again be in the room with somebody. And in terms of speaking from an improviser standpoint, you know, being in the tech and being in all that stuff, as we know, there were sometimes more problems than others. Sometimes stuff would work, and sometimes, you know, it wouldn't. And that just comes with what we're doing, right? And but being an improviser, it definitely kept me on my toes, because when in doubt, I think we had a conversation about this. When in doubt, my role really was to just talk to the person, right? To get their story, to hear more about what they were doing. And so I thought, well, if nothing works, then I can at least talk to the person. And fortunately, that never happened. But I mean, talk to the person, but you know, there were always tools that were there to use. And it really, at the same time, while I'm teaching and doing some other stuff through Unexpected Productions, it really tapped into something that was just talking about story. And it's like, oh, well, it all boils back to the story. And part of it's the story of Tinker and Lou's connection to his grandfather and that story, but also that person who's the user in the experience. And I was not personally surprised. Maybe this is a question for you guys in terms of, were you surprised? Let me put it in the form of a question before I even answer it. Were you surprised by the amount, there seemed to be a lot of emotion around the connection to what happened. And I have my own answer again to what I felt, but was that surprising to you, or did you expect it? Were you like, oh, well, this is the story we're telling. Of course, people are going to be emotionally attached to it. We're going to have emotional reactions.
Lou, would you like to go?
I was going to let you go first, but I'll just quickly. Yeah, I think that for me, I didn't expect people have that strong a reaction to some people. You know, yeah, it's kind of strange in a way, but also like I think the first performance, the first day or something, I had like a really weird meta moment where I was like, Randy's performing as my grandfather, and then this person I knew was demoing it, and then I just started like crying just hearing the audio, because it was just like weird. It was this meta, like it's a dream of mine to be sort of at Sundance, but also just sort of utilizing tech to sort of personify someone that I cared about, and then also sort of have those emotions carry through to someone else as well, and being like, oh, that was really heartfelt, and it had these sort of beats, and it's like, oh, well, that's what we were going for. And it's like weird to sort of have that from an outside observer. And it's like, yeah, I didn't think it's interesting to see the scope of people being really open with their emotions, and people being sort of closeted and then self-reflecting and then writing about it later, or being like, oh, well, this is actually how I felt, or like people subtly saying things without saying things for like their body language in VR. And it's like, for having people like reach for a hug when they like seem off put, right? Or they're like, their tone is something different, right? It's like hitting people in different ways. So it's just interesting.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't surprised. I mean, I was certainly hopeful. I feel like one of the reasons that we talked about, well, why are we creating the piece, to give people an experience of what it might be like to form a relationship with a family member and lose them to Alzheimer's disease, inherently, like we said earlier, or I said, like the whole human experience. And so I think we're creating an experience, we hope, and placing them in it and getting to kind of really react and respond to them as if they were in that situation. And that's going to hopefully bring up feelings, because it's a moving experience. And similarly, if we had done something else that maybe was similarly moving, just because people are moved by interacting with other people, and that's part of the human experience. So I wasn't surprised. And like I said, I was hopeful, because I feel like that's part of what we were doing, is to move people, to give them a sense of what it was like. And so, like Lou said, sometimes I feel like it was more subtle and you wouldn't get the obvious feedback. So you're like, maybe, maybe not. Although sometimes it was more obvious, right? Like we had one demo before Sundance, and I mean, a woman took off her headset and you could tell she was crying. So, I mean, I took that as a real compliment, right?
Right.
That she was moved.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like within the experience, there were a couple times when I was like, oh, I'm not sure, one, how to do this, and two, I wasn't expecting it. So like for one, we had a user, a woman who at the end just wanted to hold hands. I mean, in the virtual environment, it was just kind of this weird, like, oh, okay, well, how do we do that? How do I, because we can't actually feel our hands, but just that expression for connection was there. And then I guess I expected emotional connection. I didn't expect it to go maybe as deep as it did. And, kind of something Lou said earlier, alluding to one of the users who said that she grew up without grandfathers. And most of the people actually had one grandparent that they were really in touch with or close to. And most of them, that was it, which kind of surprised me, just factual sense. But afterwards, when she said, it was like, well, I never had a grandfather, so it was so great to have a grandfather for an hour. And I was like, wow. Afterwards, it really landed on me in two ways. Emotionally, it landed on me, but two, I was also going, I'm glad you didn't say that at the beginning. Because the pressure would have been too much. But the fact that she'd been moved by that, and just to be able to say that was true, I thought was great. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's maybe just relevant because I don't know how much experience people, listening in live or afterwards have with virtual reality, but I feel like core pillars of it, right? Or like the promise of the medium is like you'll often hear about presence. And I feel like immersion comes after, and then you don't hear about it as much, but it's about interaction, and agency. And so I think I'm not surprised because really you're placing someone in an experience, and we know people can be moved and touched at a distance, like if they're sitting in the stage, but imagine getting up and being in the experience. So the whole idea of present and immersive theater, for example, right, that some people might be familiar with, but like then to be able to influence and affect things, and that you're changing them, it can be really powerful because there's just less distance, right? Like you are the grandchild in this, like your scale changes. Like I believe Brandy mentioned that earlier, right? So like there's things that are literally creating this sense memory of like, okay, you probably remember when you were 5, you were a lot smaller, and like, wow, this person's really big and they're kind of really loud, and like they're working with me, and like everything around me is telling me like I'm older.
Yeah. Well, and it was amazing how many people commented on that, which I guess was something, again, I didn't necessarily see coming, but the fact that your size perspective changes as you get older, and how effective that was. Lou, I have a question for you, which, because, your grandfather was one of the first people to expose you to technology and kind of send you down this path. And I guess the easiest way to ask the question is, what do you think you would have thought of?
I know. Oh my God. I was thinking about that when I was watching you in the first performance, and that's when I started crying. I haven't really went deep on that because I actually don't want to. I feel like it's almost too meta. I think that he would have been like, oh, I think that, he had dealt with his mom getting Alzheimer's and, his dad and those sort of things. So it's sort of like a family history, right? And also some of I think his brother as well. So, I think that, Yeah, this is, I don't know, it's a touchy subject for me, but I think he probably would have been proud, but also just like, I think it would have been like a weird sort of things because he was like one of the first programmers to do sort of pharmacy technology, and he got invited to X Park and these other things. And then he got sued by IBM, and he was wearing like suspenders and overalls. If anyone sees the character design, and they were like, "Oh, this farmer can't code," and it's like he's like not a farmer, and then like so, and he was just like throwing shade at IBM. But it was just, anyways. But I think that I think he would have been proud, but I also think he would have been like, "Oh, this is like you're really pushing things," which is interesting. But also like it's sort of a non-profity thing, so I think they would have been. I think he would have been proud. I guess. Yeah, I don't know. And when I think about it too much, I'm like blur.
Right.
Gets me too emotional.
Emotion. Wow. So a follow-up question then. Actually, it's not even a follow-up question, but a different question. Because I know that you had set your sights on Sundance. We had talked about it a long time, and I know that you've looked at other festivals and submitted for other festivals. And just like anything, including improv, we submit stuff and we get picked or we don't get picked. And so what was that process like for you? I mean, obviously it was a win because you got picked, but I don't know. Was there a point when it was too surreal? Like, I can't believe we're actually going to do this at Sundance, or?
I think it's, again, it was a we, not a me. Just sort of be very clear, because we started this process like 5 years ago. I think the reason, and this is just sort of articulating this a little bit, but I think the reason that we got in is that we applied for every year for the last 5 years. So they've seen the evolution of what we're working on. So like,
they're like, put them in. We're tired of this. Put them in. Just put them in. I don't care.
Well, I think that, for example, like what we first had compared to what we have now,
right?
Like even when we first demoed to them, they're like, "Wow, this is like even within a year, like we're leveling up our skills, right?" And we're also, and I'm going to be very clear about this, is that we're like an unfunded sort of studio, and we're doing some of the most, in my opinion, obviously biased, but we're doing some of the most innovative work in sort of this space, and so like really trying to push the story medium. But I think that, the support of Sundance was really critical. They reached out to us before, they reached out to us and they were like, "Oh, how's it going?" Because last year we were in like final stages of talking with them. And to be quite frank, last year we wouldn't have made it. And this year it was still a mad dash because of some bugs and all that sort of stuff. But generally, for me, it was a little surreal because it was also, I was sort of I feel like, with everything going on, I was like sort of out of body experience where I was just trying to make the best experience for everyone. So I haven't taken sort of the time to self-reflect. It's kind of like you move the benchmark all the time when you get achievements. So it's interesting to sort of feel this proud and accomplishment, but I also want to showcase, your performance skills, but also the piece to more people. And so I'm excited to sort of go on that journey, hopefully after a break. After a break, for a clear break for me. But anyways,
right. And it's not a small undertaking, I mean, it was a mad dash to be able to do Sundance, but I mean, how many people total worked on Tinker, do you think?
Over 5 years, or like, yeah. So I mean, there's been a lot of people that have worked on the project, a lot of the Seattle community, a lot of people that I'm friends with, and all those sort of things, and they jump on and help out. Like, we had like I'm just calculating in my head. I would say 35 plus people. Over time, if you count about the 5 years, it's 50. It was 100. I would say 65 to 70 people.
Right.
Over the years that have like iterated on stuff or helped us collaborate or those things. But really, there's like a core of like 8 to 15 people that work on the project consistently, and forever grateful for every one of them. And I'm lucky enough to. And this is just something I'm going to say, and I'm going to cry probably saying it, but it's really interesting to have people believe in your dream and then make it a reality. And then like, I don't even have words to quantify sort of what it means for Randy, to you, Randy, and also Shimon, to like 5 years ago when we're in a cafe, or 4 years ago when we're improving at UP during my like a Friday lunch, we're just like testing things out. It's really awesome to get really positive feedback because it's been a really long journey. So yeah.
Cool. And then Shimon, you teach this stuff, And I'm just curious, like from your experience with Tinker, like what's a lesson or something that you have added or pass on to your students that, because I know, teaching improv and story and stuff like that, there are always things that happen and then I kind of go, wow, I hadn't thought about that before, but I'm going to share it with the students because it's going to help them be better improvisers or storytellers. Is there a couple or one thing that kind of came out of this experience that kind of surprised you where you're like, this is a teachable moment to help people down the road who are wanting to do this?
Thank you, Randy. I don't. So yes, there were many. I think there were many surprises, and some of them were shocking. And I don't know if I've been able to take all those teachable moments and share them with other people yet. And I do teach and I design trainings. I haven't necessarily done as much related to this kind of project. I'm sure, a lot of thoughts. I think, core to my experience of being interested in theater, but improv and applied improv and studying at UP, right? I always thought like improvisation is great training for life. And so this is the most technically involved project I've ever worked on. And you had to kind of react and respond in real time and try and deal with all the challenges of the hardware and software, which were almost constantly changing. It felt like that. And so to try and be able to like let it land and then just kind of respond and try and regroup and figure out, well, where are we? Where can we go with what we have and how do we need to change? Like that core skill is really relevant even before we get to like creating the piece. But try to do that in the context of then work with what you can do. Yeah, because it was continually challenging throughout because it's re-emerging. The hardware and software, it comes and goes. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. Licenses disappear for products because a large corporation buys them. And so even though you had the ability to use them, it's like gone. So like, literally feels like things are being pulled away. Like there's emerging technology. And then I said to Lou once in a meeting with some other team members, this is like emerging tech, right? There's VR and then there's VR that's trying to do some of these things where Lou talking about like leading edge. And so that just kind of reacting and responding. And it was really challenging, but that improviser's mindset, I think is really helpful, as is then saying, well, what can we do with our constraints? So.
Yeah, it really, for me, pointed out as an improviser, and this is something that I think we've talked about in the project, and I know Shimon, talked about just in improv. It really highlighted that thing that I try to pass on to students about using your advantages, and that it's just, if something goes wrong or something's not working or something's that, it's sort of like doing shows on Zoom and so, well, we got all this technology like between us, and that's what is. And so for me, it really boiled down to, just focusing on the user and kind of going, okay, that's the same exact relationship that I prefer to have with people when I'm doing the show at the theater. It's a one-on-one connection and we're just having a conversation. And yeah, there's all this stuff in the theater, there's lights and, there's, distractions as well. But at the end of the day, it really highlighted that, oh no, I'm going to have a conversation with this person. And it's going to be unique. And it was. I mean, every single performance of it for me was very different than the performances before it. There was never like, oh, well, that was just like this. It was like every single person was really different. And you had those people who were chatty, you had people who were really interested in improvising and creating their own history. You had people that didn't want to talk at all. So, so it was kind of rising or lowering to their level, whatever that level is, was a lesson that I learned. So
yeah, and I think you keyed in on something which I didn't make explicit, was like when I was talking about reacting and responding and like saying, well, what can you do in the context of that human experience, which is once again, the project is trying something by putting up two people together, but then of course it's like, how do we make that the focus? And in a way, everybody's working together, but to support you when you're in there with them, because you're the lead at that point, and like everything's kind of all around you to be able to do that. So
right, yeah, no, it was definitely unique, and different. And it was a little bit, being in that experience felt, it's sort of like, I don't know, I can't even find a nice metaphor for it. I will, but it might take a while. But it's the idea of, once it started, it's like, okay, it's me and this person. And whatever happens, right, it's me and this person. And I know that I have support, and the stuff in the world, everything's supportive, but in the end it just boils down to like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I'm connected to this person, which again, I wish I could maintain and keep that kind of focus all the time, like when I'm on stage with a fellow performer or something like that. Because I think sometimes when we're on stage, we can drift a little bit, but yeah. So Sundance happened. Lou's going to take a day off, half a day off, and then get back to it. What have you learned from, experiencing this, going through the Sundance experience? Which I will also say to people watching, that it was intense. We were doing it twice a day, pretty much every day of Sundance. And I kept thinking, oh, well, there are a bunch of movies and things I want to see and do all this stuff. And I was so exhausted after, 2 shows. I was just like, my brain was just totally like, I just want to sit here and stare at the wall. And then sleep a little bit. But having gone through that experience, so this intense, twice a day, having lots of stuff, there were interviews and other things that happened as part of that. As we're all kind of spit out at the end of Sundance, what do we take home? What changes? What do you kind of go, gee, now I know this, and so next time we'll do that, or gee, I won't do that again? Thoughts, Lou?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I didn't sleep for like a week, but that's besides the point. I think that there were things that were successful about the experience. Generally, I think there's a lot to be improved. I think that there's some things that happened on our sort of development side that caused a lot of issues, and we had to use an older framework, so it allowed less participants to be able to see it. So, going forward, having a clear plan on the features and other things that we want to accomplish, but also being able to scale out. So Randy doesn't have to do 2 performances. Also, I didn't realize it was not to sound like I wasn't performing, but obviously I was setting up stuff in the back end. Live performances are way more nerve-wracking and harder than I ever suspected. And so obviously kudos to you and everyone that does live things. It's much more challenging. I think that my goal for the project is to obviously showcase it to as many people as possible, and also hopefully partner with some Alzheimer's organization or neurodegenerative health stuff, because we're building out a sort of a framework that allows us to do this. But I'm really excited to sort of have this, I would call it a preview of like what we're working on, and like already having really great feedback, but then like leveling it up and like working on it over the next, couple of months to really make it so it's easy, but also to showcase sort of like what Randy's ability to do, and also some of the technology on our side for like Randy to be able to articulate faces in a real time, being able to blink or all those other things. Well, it really allows Randy to sort of, even like us going through that performance, Randy's next performances will even be way better because he's had the exam, had those performances. We did a couple practices, but it wasn't nearly as enough as we needed to. And so getting more gamut of users in there is going to be super interesting to see what happens. That's sort of my thoughts, but I'm super excited that it happened. Obviously some time for me to self-reflect, and then also for me to disconnect, but I'm super excited to showcase it to more people, and hopefully we'll be able to showcase it to people that don't have VR headsets as well, in Twitch form or in A, B, or C. So the audience is larger, and maybe even on a phone. So these are some things that I'm thinking about.
Shimon?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lou's comments were thoughtful. You kind of reflect after, and it's kind of where are we and where we want to go. I was reflecting before when I was talking about that other comment about, just reacting and responding. Creative people, you often have a vision for what something is. So, and I feel like that's the ideal. And then there's the reality, and like the tension to me of like the creative work supported by the technology was that tension, right? Like, I feel like it seemed like it landed really well with people, and they responded like we're talking about, and we're feeling things and thinking things. And that's really already powerful. But it would be really great to kind of stabilize the development process and maybe in the build to support like you in there with, like Lou said, more people, but also the things you can do, or a little more sense of ease, because I could tell you were working harder. You mentioned like, I have some frame of reference for working with you. And I was like, wow, I can tell Randy's working really hard, and it would be great if it was just a little easier. Also, because I think it would just let you breathe a little more in the experience, and open up some new performance possibilities also. So I think if as that happens, like there'll be opportunities to kind of do more in there improvisationally. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, for me, the thing I've been reflecting on since Sundance, kind of echoing something that Lou said earlier, is this idea of, what's the potential to be influenced by, say, the Alzheimer's community, and just, how can you do it? Because to me, that was such a great aspect to the experience, was we're giving you a chance to sort of experience this both on an emotional side, but also just an experiential side. Because again, playing the grandfather, as you get further into the experience, for those who've not seen it, he gets more and more sort of out of it a little bit. And eventually, essentially, I think what I decided on as a performer was the roles kind of switch. Beginning, the grandfather was kind of in charge and telling the user what to do. And by the end, the goal was the user basically has to tell the grandfather kind of how to do stuff and what to do. And so that aspect to it, I think, would be a step forward. And I'm thinking about that in terms of like even virtual reality. Because I go, like, if this is the new movies, right, then what are we going to do with it? Or what does it mean? Or what kind of things can we do? And sure, we can have lots of really exciting experiences, but I just see that value in terms of what like Tinker brought as an educational and an emotional educational experience. That was really pretty cool. And it would be nice to again in a little while circle back around to it, and then just kind of go, okay, well, what can we do to make that experience even more, make that part of the experience even more. So yeah, and I was impressed obviously with Tinker and your guys' work, as well as the team. And again, we're talking about people from around the world who worked on this project. But I was also, actually being at Sundance and getting a chance to talk a little bit, not a lot, and certainly not as much as I wanted to, with other people who are not tackling the same project, but similar. We're part of the New Frontier program, and that meant, certain kinds of projects. And I was just flat out just impressed. I was just like, wow, there are a lot of people who are doing some really cool stuff. And, and is this, again, that future, and to be part of that was pretty cool. Yeah, cool. So I
was just going to share design trainings for VR, right? And so I think I that really resonates with me, that kind of way in which you're learning through an experience. I think having kind of designed more straight trainings, and one of the things with those is really trying to bring in those elements so it doesn't feel so static, it's dynamic. And so it feels like you're located in a place and you're embodied, and also like bring more to it so it doesn't just feel like you're learning. So I think that's a real benefit of the piece. Not that we can't look to accentuate those elements, but I think, and I was impressed by what other people were doing as well. Like I didn't get to try all of them like you. I was just kind of like, wow, okay, 2 performances a day, and I'm not even Randy in there. I was like, I'm going to stare at the wall. But I think there's something to be said, like, to somebody who focuses on learning and designs trainings of different types. Like, it's really great. It was you get this through the experience instead of having to separate it out or making it a little more instructional. And I think that says something to like what art and design can do. That you can still get a lot out of it and kind of maybe learn as much in a really powerful way, because you create an emotional connection, because it's memorable, because it creates a felt sense. And so.
All right. Cool. All right. We're just about out of time, but I did want to end up with you guys sharing with me, and it's a personal question, I guess. Just this idea of what, again, surprised you the most about improvisation and VR in this project. So, like, what did you not expect to have happen, or thought would happen, but then didn't happen, or happened in a different way? As this process unfolded, because I mean, I definitely had a few things where I thought, oh, it's going to be like this, and then it wasn't like that at all. So yeah, thoughts.
I thought it was funny, or I like to play up things when I'm in virtual reality, or like I just like to play up, being a little bit extra. But it was interesting to see someone see a poster on the wall and then create a narrative between you two. And they started improving. I thought that was so really weird. I was like, I didn't think that would happen, that someone would just start making up a backstory or like whatever. And then it was like Randy was like it was like basically between two improv people, so it was very interesting to sort of see that come to life. I thought it was also interesting to sort of have someone being like a fly on the wall, even though they were the participant, because you would expect someone to talk a little bit. But then like them, testing everything and seeing those conversations. I think the thing that was also unique that I found pretty fascinating is that people love cameras. Like, and it seemed like every time we would go in the experience, Randy would have to take some Polaroids, or the user would take some Polaroids of Randy. And it was just really interesting to see that, like, that moment resonated. Like, we're like, oh, this would be a cool thing to add, and then like we'll have it in the experience. And it was actually like one of the biggest things that people sort of resonated with, especially, having the context that it is an Alzheimer's piece. So I think that was something that was really interesting. I think the only thing that I thought was that I didn't really sort of think would happen as much was that we thought that people would guide Randy at the end, but we thought that it would be kind of a difficult thing, but in some cases they were really leading Randy, which was kind of fascinating. Obviously that was the goal, but it was really awesome to see that sort of play out, because I was really afraid of sort of the 4 and 5 scenes of like Randy sort of losing agency over time, but the users seemed to resonate with that and seemed like they got their man. I'll pass it off to Shimon, because I've been elaborating.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel like I'm going to respond in a way where people might be like, huh. I kind of said before, like, the core thing is reacting and responding, like being responsive because of everything changing. But to me, that was all related to the technology and this to be able to like create the experience and create the location and build the where and create the objects, like all the stuff in there. Like, I'm not saying I knew how people would respond, but I just imagined a range of responses, and it all made sense to me. Like our process and how we discover things in rehearsal. And also having worked with Randy on pieces where he used improvisation to create an experience. Like that was also something I advocated for during the process, which was a creative tension sometimes. But I'm like, that was how I was approaching it, and know things are going to emerge through that. And when things did, I was surprised that they came out, but I wasn't surprised because I was like, yeah, this is why this way is really great. The group energy and group mind, we're seeing things come out we wouldn't have on our own. And maybe it's just because, I mean, improv is a love of mine, and VR, and that's why when I found this project, I was always working in this direction. I don't feel like it really surprised me, because it feels like it's like all these things that would happen improvisationally, but you're just placing people in an experience where it's heightened. It's improvisational theater in VR, and so in a way, it's got like elements of a live performance, TV and film elements, but game as well. And so maybe it's also coming with a game background of like ambient environmental storytelling in games. But like, to me, it's just the same as building the where and like letting people play off of it. Like, yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful. It might seem off, but it's just like, it just made sense. Like I was surprised by things, but I wasn't surprised by things, because we tried to have an improvisational process. We tried to be open how people would respond. And I just have seen it in live performance. I feel like some of the things we're talking about, like you put someone on stage, it's possible for them to have that experience. Like if you build this world around them, that's going to happen, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and again, speaking from the improviser's point of view, I was just amazed at how it integrated well and how that process happened. And I know part of it was just part of our integration process at the beginning, because we sort of started with improv, and worked our way towards design and intent. And I was just struck by how useful improv was in this kind of environment, that is so, in a way, tries to be as predictable as possible, right? And I don't mean story-wise, I just mean like you want stuff to work and you want everything to happen the way that you programmed it to happen. And so to have this kind of improvisational freedom was really great. And I was also surprised that I expected the technology to get more in the way. And so that was nice that, again, as I was saying earlier, it's like having a conversation with the user. The technology didn't really get in the way of that conversation, which kind of surprised me, because I just thought, oh, it's going to be really, techie and it's going to be, we have to like overcome all this stuff. But the actual interaction with the person, I felt, was like a great part of the design, and how it then got executed. So that was super cool. Cool. Any other projects or things you guys want to tinker to?
Tinker too.
All right.
What's the brand? I don't even know the Star Wars reference, but the Awakening, I don't know, whatever. But I'm excited to. I think my last sort of closing comment would be is that I really appreciate Randy, and I went to a bunch of shows at the sort of shows that Randy and this sort of place does, and so it was it's a real privilege to work with Randy and Shimon. And I'm forever grateful, and I'm excited to showcase the project to more people. And a hard flex at the end is that we did sort of get the best experience it by Engadget for VR, based upon Randy's sort of performance, or high accolades. So I can't wait to showcase it to more people. And thanks, and I love everyone. Bless.
Yeah, cool. Shimon, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I also just think you kind of mentioned it. It's years in the making. And so it's really incredible to finally get to kind of have more people into the rehearsal process and open up, and then have a performance run that was short, but simultaneously felt like it went on for a long time. And just how incredible, because to me, it's sort of like the culmination of this work. And I feel like we're all talking around it, just how incredible it was for to get to put two people together in a virtual reality and see what happens. And so the idea of continuing to showcase the piece and let it grow and develop is exciting. We're doing other related work with live performance in VR. That's super exciting to me, because I just think there's so much there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you guys for coming on and doing this. And I just think it's an interesting intersection between improv and what's happening. Two, thank you both for your work, and Lou for the inspiration, because clearly this wouldn't be happening if you weren't inspired to do this by your grandfather, for your grandfather. And to the entire team. I mean, I felt as an actor, an improviser, it's like there are all these people behind the scenes making this really cool car, and then they hand you the keys and go, okay, you get to drive the car. And you're like, oh, okay. So there's so much happening behind the scenes and everything that I'm sure I don't even will ever understand exactly everything that went into it. But I know there was a lot of work by a lot of people. But thanks to you guys for involving me in the project in Unexpected Productions. as
I
well.
feel like I would remiss if I didn't say thank you, Randy. You know, I know you, I know your work. I was trying not to talk you up too much because it would seem like I'm biased, but I just appreciate you. And I mean, back to that metaphor of the car, we had somebody who could race cars, you know, right? Like, you know, whatever your metaphor is, but I feel like if it's like, you're like, okay, given the car, you like had some sense of what you could do with it, even though like, because there's people who test, that's to be the metaphor. There's people who test cars before they come out, right? There's literally people who just drive them around and they've got to deal with just learning it. And you're learning on the fly and doing things, but making great decisions, you know, reading the road, the passengers are feeling great, you know, they're participating. It's just, it was exciting to see, right? Like that. And I was super excited because I just knew how much it would grow when we gave you the opportunity, when we gave you the keys to the car. So yeah.
Cool. All right.
Second that.
So a couple things. And Eric, by the way, says Lou is an inspiration.
Whoa.
Facebook chat. So there you go. So cool. Thank you guys for being here. Again, look for Tinker. There is some stuff online. You can go to find stuff on Tinker. Is it VR? tinkervr.com.
Yes.
So check stuff out there. There's also a lot of stuff that came out from Sundance, and there are even reviews and conversations about it. There are a couple of interviews with Lou that are pretty cool. Check all that out. Check out our UP stuff. So we have a show tonight, Fact or Fiction Storytelling. We have our Wednesday duo show. We have a bunch of stuff coming up. We have actually, as we speak, there's a sold out storytelling class that's happening, but I think there still might be room for tomorrow's class. It's Margot Lightman will be teaching. I think it's a 4-hour class, something like that. Anyway, all this available at unexpectedproductions.org, and come and check that out. And yeah, and thank you for spending the last hour here listening to us. And hopefully next week, actually next week we won't have an interview, but in 2 weeks we'll have another interview. And so I hope you'll come back then. And until then, thank you guys very much.
Bye, everybody.